Alright, hello everybody. Today I want to be talking about should you use Smite. Recently I actually saw a gameplay of a Disciplined Priest in Hellier, and they did, on Mythic Hellier, and they did phenomenally well. I did have a video back saying, why I was playing Holy on Hellier, and I think it's still quite valid for my situation, but you can see on this Hellier example that they basically go for an entire 10-minute fight without really casting many smites. I don't have the log to tell you exactly how many smites they have because it's still private, I believe. But you can see by the gameplay, and I think I will link in the description below, just how many smites they actually cast throughout the fight, and and how they basically pull off this style. So I wanted to really just go over today about whether or not your gameplay should be using Smite. When it's good to Smite and when it's not good to Smite. Now I've always said in my guides and stuff that the key to doing well with Disc is to make sure you're using every global you can. So whether that's applying atonements through Powered Shield or Powered Radiance or Plea, whether that's casting Penance, Shadowward Pain or Smite, or just casting Shadow Mends, or doing something with your global. There's always Disc Priest, you can be putting in quite a bit of damage, so using every global is generally a pretty safe way to play and a pretty good way to get decent logs. If anyone's seen my logs, I definitely do this, and this is kind of representative of just how I play, and that's why I generally tend to get up 95 to 100% in most of my kills, just because I'm using Smite probably a lot more than most people. Now that might cut into my healing in some situations. There's a there is a trade-off. So obviously when you're going to be smiting, you are going to be doing some healing with that, and the actual mana for healing isn't actually too bad in comparison to Penance. You'll get told as a Disc Priest that you always want to be using Penance on cooldown, and that's going to be your main throughput. But the actual, if you look at the amount of mana it costs to cast Penance, it's about 30k mana, and it does about 3 times the damage of a Smite. So Penance isn't actually that more mana efficient than Smite. It's just that Penance does a lot more damage per time spent. So that's why you're seeing people use Penance and not, you don't see as many Smites going off. So really, what's the trade-off between casting Smite and not casting Smite? Well, it just comes down to really the type of fight you're doing, and really just how much you value, say, an extra 5-10% increased healing because you might have an extra, innovate going off the fight, or whether you prefer having 10-20% extra damage. So that's something you have to weigh up, but again, it is mostly fight dependent. So just to kind of give you an example of where Smite, you might not want to be casting Smite in certain phases, is say on Ursoc. So at the start of the fight on Ursoc, you as a Disc Priest, really, you might have a cooldown going off for the first charge, and the Cacophonies don't really do that much damage. So is there really much point in you spam casting Smite to just be overhealing your atonements? If there's no damage out, if there's no damage before a charge, as a healer, not really. If you're looking to push and rage, maybe. It kind of just depends. You have to kind of weigh up with your raid group, whether you need the extra damage or you might need the extra mana for the healing later on in the fight. So that's probably the prime example of probably when it's okay just to not cast anything. It's just, alright, well, I don't need to really be healing at the start of Ursoc because, there's not much damage, and I don't really need to be DPSing maybe because you're going to hit their enrage regardless, and your damage, even though it's fairly significant, it might not be, it might not make the difference between you getting, an extra charge at the end of the fight or not. So, your damage is kind of mute up until a certain point. Because the one thing to consider as well, that Smite is the largest part of your damage, is it if you're using it a fair bit. It'll generally tend to be about 40% of your damage, but casting less Smites won't really affect your overall DPS as much, because majority of your damage will still be coming from Shadowward Pain and Penance, or Purge of the Wicked and Penance, I should say, and Halo. So it's kind of minimal gains either way. But one thing I did want to add onto casting Smite is that it does do actually a fair amount of healing. So when you're burst phasing, so when you get up to 20 atonements, you might go cast out Alliance Wrath, you might cast out a Penance following that, and then rather than actually going back to casting Powered Radiances or Powered Shielding, although I do suggest you do Powered Shield pretty much on cooldown every single time, it'll still be worth casting, Smite in that situation rather than reapplying atonements, because, one Smite might be a 2.7 million heal at that point when it's, hitting every single person in your raid. So in the end of the day, what's really better is you really got to kind of evaluate what's best for your raid team, and it actually does really come down to what your mana's like, and depending on how many innovates / symbol of hopes you can get during a fight. That can significantly increase the amount of radiances you get to cast, which will then, decrease the amount of smites you have to cast. But yeah, so there isn't really, I wouldn't say there's a wrong playstyle. You're not really ever gonna be punishing yourself too hard to be casting Smite. But there might be situations where you don't want to be casting it just because you want the mana, and that just comes from having a good knowledge of the fights, and having a good knowledge of whether, say, you need 60% mana for phase 3 of a fight, even though it might be the last 20%, so you really want to just try to conserve up until that point, rather than spending your mana on doing a little bit of damage earlier on in the fight. So I hope this kind of helped some people to understand why you're seeing these top logs, people doing a fantastic amount of healing and not using Smite, and you might be sitting there with your logs going, well, that's the difference between, what's happening and, maybe I should cast less Smites. So hope this was informative. I'll leave the rest of the video playing. This was actually, I think this is rank 1 for Xavius in the background here, so if you're interested in knowing how to get rank 1 without really cheesing, I am running Power Infusion and Mind Bender in this, so it is a little bit of a DPS cheese, but I didn't even go insane twice in this video, and I still managed to do 230k, so it's pretty good. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.